When Mark Twain visited the Holy Land, he was very intrigued by the beauty of the Sea of Galilee. He saw that there was a ferry that took people from one side to the other. So he inquired about it, and he said, I would like to go on the ferry to go from one side of the sea to the other. But when he found out what the hefty cost of traveling on the ferry was, he said, no wonder Jesus walked. Today, our gospel talks about that particular story and talks about Jesus being on the water and about the time of day that it occurred. And it was at the fourth watch, which means that it was about 3 a.m. Now, unless you're working and you have a purpose for being out, if you're up at 3 a.m, it's usually not a good thing. Possibly you're not feeling well. Maybe you have a worry about something that's going to happen the next day. Maybe you're waiting for someone to come home, and they're not quite home yet, but they should be at that time. Maybe you have a knock at the door or a phone call. Those are not usually good things at that time of the day. No matter what the reason might be that you are perhaps up at 3 a.m, I hope you're not out, because my grandparents used to say, after midnight, nothing good happens outside. So really you should be in by 3 a.m. But for the apostles, maybe it was something similar to that, because at 3 a.m, they were out on the boat. Jesus invited them to go out to be able to go over to the other side. And suddenly at that time, like it's dark out and a big storm came up. Maybe kind of like what we have here in Central Florida. Sometimes a storm kind of comes out of nowhere and it's like a monsoon with a lot of rain. So they were fearful anyway, and then they see this figure out on the water. And they probably wondered, well, who could this possibly be? That in the midst of the darkness, in the midst of turbulence, in the midst of kind of a trying time, they were very afraid. And then they see this figure out there, and in their mentality, they thought it could have been maybe a sea monster. We're talking 2,000 years ago, where they hadn't explored all of the bottom of the sea. They didn't really know what was there, and that was kind of part of their thought, was maybe there was this creature coming to get them. It was the boogeyman coming to get them. But it wasn't. It was Jesus. So when he invited Peter to come to him, Peter lacked faith. Peter was probably a lot like you and me. He lacked a certain amount of trust in God. And Jesus said, well, take courage. Come to me and don't be afraid. My presence is here. There's kind of a thought process that in this particular story that maybe we could see some symbolism, that when Matthew wrote this particular gospel reading, when he wrote this, it would have been about 50 years after the resurrection. And about 50 years after the resurrection, there was some persecution already going on about people who were saying and proclaiming to be Christians, proclaiming to give themselves to Christ. And so as a result, about 50 years after that time period, maybe the boat represented the early church. Maybe it was like a bark, like the boat that kind of was the place where the people were. Perhaps the storm was that persecution that was going on, the persecution that was kind of happening among the people, and people were almost about to be martyred. And then the presence of Christ was there, but Jesus was in heaven with his hand reaching down. So in a similar kind of way, when we hear this particular story, maybe they were just looking for God's presence in the midst of suffering. Maybe in the midst of the darkest hour, the people were looking for Christ, looking for Jesus. And what did he say? Take courage, I am here. Take courage, I am here. Elijah was looking for a similar presence of God in the first reading. He was running from King Ahaz, and he was running from his evil wife Jezebel. And he went hid in a cave looking for God. But in all of the natural things that occurred, he didn't find him, but he found him in the silence. He found God in the sheer silence. So the message perhaps for us today is, first of all, I don't know where you are at in your life and maybe what's on your mind today. Are you going through any kind of suffering, maybe health issues? Are you worried about something perhaps with your job, maybe your home, maybe your children or grandchildren? For our younger people, for our youth here of our parish, I'm sorry to tell you this, but tomorrow's a day that's very special for you here in Seminole County. On Tuesday for our parish school, it's the first day of school. What a great day that it's going to be. But maybe you're worried. Maybe to our little ones, maybe you're a little worried about going back to school. No matter where it is that you are at or what's on your mind, we can take this message, though, and take that example of Elijah, combined with that scenario that Peter found himself in. And maybe in the silence of whatever darkness we have, whatever challenges, whatever suffering there might be, maybe we can just hear the Lord saying to us, "Take courage, it is I. I am here, I'm here for you. I will walk with you. Have faith, not fear, but rather trust in that presence of God, who he himself knew at another 3:00 hour when it was pure daylight what suffering was. But what did he do? He opened up his arms to the Father and he said, yes. Yes, whatever your will may be. Maybe that's what God is asking for us to do as well, to open up our arms, to say, Lord, I want to listen to you, to hear his very simple words of take courage, and he is present. And if we take that quiet moment, whether it's 3 p.m. or 3 a.m, I'm sure we'll know what his holy presence is, and perhaps have whatever we are going through suddenly make sense, because God makes himself known to us, and we trust in him.